When I first enlisted in the Army, I thought I had life figured out. I was 20, eager to prove myself, and, admittedly, a bit naive. The recruiters sold me on the dream, a structured life of service and camaraderie. I believed every word. That officers were selfless leaders, that non-commissioned officers were walking encyclopedias of military knowledge, and that fellow soldiers would become like family. What I didn't realize then was that there's a massive difference between how things are written in doctrine and how they play out in reality. It didn't take long for me to see the cracks. Officers weren't all heroes. They were often just college graduates trying to climb the career ladder. NCOs weren't always the mentors I'd hoped for. Some were just coasting on years of experience without much interest in teaching the next generation. And the idea of soldiers as a family? That fell apart the moment egos clashed and personal agendas took priority. Despite these early disappointments, I remained optimistic. I had something to prove, not just to myself but to my new wife, Lily. We'd been high school sweethearts, and she was only 19 when we got married. Young, idealistic, and just as eager to build a life as I was. Lily was stunning, with golden blonde hair, piercing blue eyes, and a confidence that could light up any room. She'd been the classic cheerleader in school, the kind of girl everyone noticed, but she had a sharp mind to match her beauty. I thought I had everything. A beautiful wife, a promising career, and a plan to escape the poverty we both grew up in. The Army was supposed to be our way out, a path to stability and a better life. My initial training was grueling, but I thrived on the challenge. I breezed through boot camp, earned my airborne wings, and even completed ranger training. By the time I finished, I felt like a certified badass, ready to tackle anything the military threw my way. But reality had other plans. Instead of joining an elite unit like the Special Operations Forces or the 82nd Airborne, I was assigned to a security detail overseas. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't what I'd worked so hard for, but I didn't complain. I wanted to prove I could handle whatever came my way. The work schedule was a nightmare. On paper, we were supposed to have a manageable rotation, 24 hours on, 24 hours off, followed by 3 8-hour shifts. But with manpower shortages and constant overseas conflicts, the Army slashed our team from 5 shifts to just 2. The result? Endless days of 24-hour shifts followed by 6 hours of administrative work, then a measly 18 hours off. Rinse and repeat, 365 days a year. I was working close to 5,000 hours annually, more than double the normal workload. By the time I got home, I was physically and mentally wrecked. All I wanted was food, sleep, and maybe a little time with Lily before I passed out. At first, Lily seemed understanding. She'd moved overseas with me, leaving behind her friends and family, and I knew the adjustment hadn't been easy for her. She spent her days at the on-base recreation center, mingling with other spouses and soldiers. She told me she was taking college classes, working toward a degree so she could contribute to our future. But cracks started to form in our marriage almost immediately. Lily was beautiful, and the other soldiers noticed. She was constantly surrounded by young men, many of whom had nothing better to do than hang out and flirt. I didn't think much of it at first. I trusted her, and I figured she was just being friendly. Looking back, I realize how naive I was. The longer we stayed overseas, the more I noticed the strain creeping into my marriage. My schedule at the security detail was relentless, 24-hour shifts followed by a short break, and then right back into it. I was running on fumes most days, and when I finally came home, I barely had the energy to talk to Lily, let alone spend quality time with her. At first, Lily seemed patient. She knew what I was dealing with, and she tried to fill her time by taking college courses and hanging out at the base recreation center. It gave her something to do, a distraction from the loneliness. But over time, her patience began to wear thin. I didn't realize it at first because I was so focused on surviving my own workload. When I came home, I'd collapse onto the couch, eat whatever she'd cooked, and fall asleep almost instantly. We still had sex a few times a week, but it wasn't the passionate connection we'd had when we were first married. It was rushed and mechanical, just another box to check off before I passed out. Lily started talking about one of her college professors, Captain Tyler Mason. He was an officer stationed on base who taught night classes to earn some extra money. She spoke about him often, too often. "Tyler is such a great teacher," she said one night. her face lighting up as she told me about his class. He really knows how to break things down so everyone can understand. You'd really like him. That's nice, I said, not really paying attention. But she didn't stop there. Over the next few weeks, Tyler's name came up in almost every conversation. She'd tell me about the funny stories he shared in class, how he encouraged her to participate more, how he seemed to really care about his students. At first, I didn't think much of it. I was glad she had something to keep her busy while I was stuck at work. One night, however, my curiosity got the better of me. I had the rare chance to finish a shift early, and I decided to stop by her class to see what all the fuss was about. I figured I'd surprise her, maybe even sit in for a bit. When I arrived, the classroom door was slightly ajar, so I peeked through the window. What I saw made my stomach twist. Lily was sitting in the front row, her body angled toward Tyler, who was standing at the podium. She wasn't just listening. She was hanging on his every word. Her smile was wide, her eyes sparkling, and she laughed at every joke he made, even the ones that weren't funny. It wasn't just admiration. It was something more. I stayed just long enough to confirm what my gut was already telling me. When the class ended, I watched as Lily lingered near Tyler, chatting with him as the other students left. She laughed at something he said, her hand brushing his arm lightly. Tyler didn't step back. In fact, he leaned in closer, lowering his voice as he spoke to her. I clenched my fists, anger bubbling under the surface. But instead of storming in, I turned and walked away. I didn't want to cause a scene, not yet. When I got home that night, Lily greeted me with a cheerful smile. "You're home early," she said, wrapping her arms around me. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a smile. "Figured I'd surprise you." If she suspected anything, she didn't show it. She told me about her day as if nothing had happened, completely oblivious to the fact that I'd seen her with Tyler. From that moment on, I started noticing little things. Lily became more guarded, brushing off my questions about her classes with vague answers. She stopped telling me details about her day and started spending more time at the rec center or out, studying. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe I was just paranoid, overthinking things because I was exhausted and stressed. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. And the name Tyler Mason was always there, lurking in the back of my mind like a shadow I couldn't shake. The cracks in my marriage widened as my workload continued to grind me down. My 24-hour shifts didn't stop, and neither did my unease about Lily and Tyler Mason. I didn't have the time or energy to investigate, but the tension between us was impossible to ignore. One evening, Lily approached me in the living room, her face serious. "We need to talk," she said, her voice heavy. I nodded, setting aside the book I was pretending to read. "What's on your mind?" She hesitated, wringing her hands. "I've been thinking, maybe we need some time apart. A legal separation." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What? Why?" She sighed, avoiding my gaze. "We're growing apart, Jack. You're never home, and when you are, you're too exhausted to even talk to me. I just feel alone." My chest tightened. I wanted to tell her that I was doing everything I could to support us, that the insane hours I worked were for her, for us. But I could see in her eyes that she wasn't looking for an explanation. Her mind was already made up. "Is this about Tyler?" I asked bluntly, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. Her head snapped up, and for a brief moment, I saw guilt flash across her face. "No," she said too quickly. "This has nothing to do with him. This is about us." I didn't believe her, but I didn't have the energy to argue. Between my workload and the financial strain of our life overseas, I didn't have the resources to fight her decision. Reluctantly, I signed the separation papers, sending her back to the States while I stayed behind to finish my deployment. 6 months later, my tour ended, and I rotated back to the U.S. I was expecting to step into an empty house, but to my surprise, Lily was there, waiting for me. "Jack," she said, her voice trembling as she stood on the porch. "I want to come back. I want us to work things out." I stared at her, my emotions a swirling mix of anger, relief, and confusion. "What changed?" I asked cautiously. She looked down, her hands fidgeting. "My mom. She told me I'd be a fool to let you go. She's right. You're a good man, and I've been selfish." I didn't fully believe her, but a part of me wanted to. I still loved her. God help me, I did. And I hated the idea of failing at marriage. I'd been raised by a divorced mom, and I'd sworn to myself that I'd never put my future kids through the same experience. So I took her back. At first, things seemed better. My new assignment had a manageable schedule, 8-hour days, no more 24-hour shifts, and I was finally able to spend real time with Lily. We started going on date nights again, and I thought we were finally getting back on track. But then, one afternoon, everything fell apart. I came home early from work, ready to surprise Lily with a nice dinner out. As I unlocked the front door, I heard the phone ringing inside. We had 2 landline phones, one in the kitchen and one in the bedroom upstairs. I reached for the kitchen phone just as Lily picked up the upstairs extension. "Hello, Tyler," she said, her voice soft and familiar. I froze, the receiver pressed to my ear. "I miss you too," she continued, her tone dripping with affection. "Can we talk later? Jack's been working late, so I should be free tonight." My blood ran cold. I stood there in stunned silence as she went on, sharing details of their past encounters that made my stomach churn. When she finally ended the call with an all-too-casual, "I love you," I slammed the receiver down, rage bubbling to the surface. I stormed upstairs, my footsteps heavy. Lily was sitting on the bed, the phone still in her hand. She looked up, startled, when she saw me. "Jack? How long?" I demanded, my voice trembling with anger. Her face crumpled, and she burst into tears. I didn't mean for it to happen," she sobbed. "How long, Lily?" "Since we were overseas," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It started when I was his student, but I ended it before I came back to you." "I swear." I shook my head, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "Don't lie to me." I heard the phone call. "You're still seeing him, aren't you?" After a long pause, she nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Why?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why him?" She wiped at her tears, struggling to find the words. "He made me feel special," she said finally, "like I was a princess. With you, you're a good man, Jack, but I felt like I was invisible." Her words hit me like a slap to the face. "So you threw away our marriage for someone who makes you feel special?" "It was a mistake," she said, reaching for my hand. "I'm sorry. I love you, Jack." I pulled away, my stomach turning at her touch. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this." She tried to explain herself, saying it was just sex, that it didn't mean anything, but I couldn't listen anymore. I left the house that night, walking aimlessly through the streets, trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. When I received orders for a 1-year unaccompanied tour overseas, I didn't know whether to feel relieved or crushed. On one hand, it meant I'd get some distance from Lily and the toxic mess our marriage had become. On the other, I knew leaving her behind was practically inviting her to destroy what little remained of our relationship. The week before I left was a blur of anger, confusion, and desperation. Lily, in an apparent attempt to salvage what we had, initiated sex more often than she had in months. Morning, night, whenever we could. It felt like she was trying to use my body to convince me she still cared. I went along with it, but in the back of my mind, all I could think about was Tyler. Every touch, every kiss felt hollow, like I was sharing her with a ghost I couldn't get rid of. When I finally boarded the plane, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. At least overseas, I wouldn't have to see her face every day. But the relief didn't last. Back then, email wasn't common in combat zones, so Lily and I wrote letters instead. Her letters came sporadically, usually filled with generic updates about her life. She never mentioned Tyler, and she always ended with, "I love you, Jack. Stay safe." But even in her words, I could sense the distance between us. I wrote back out of obligation, keeping my tone light and polite, but I stopped sharing anything real with her. She didn't deserve to know how I felt, how much I was struggling to reconcile the woman I'd married with the one who'd betrayed me. As months passed, rumors started reaching me through the grapevine. Soldiers rotating in and out of my unit mentioned seeing Lily hanging out at the officers' and NCO clubs back on base. They described her as the life of the party, always surrounded by men, always laughing and smiling. "Your wife's a popular gal," one soldier said with a smirk. I clenched my fists and forced myself to walk away. The stories got worse. Lily wasn't just socializing. She was around. Captain Tyler Mason wasn't the only one. There was Captain Greg Hastings, Lieutenant Mark Reed, and even a sergeant named Rick Carter. By the time the rumors reached me, Lily's name had become synonymous with scandal. I felt like a fool. While I was risking my life on the front lines, she was turning our marriage into a joke. 6 months into my tour, I was granted 2 weeks of leave. I was desperate to confront Lily, to get answers, to figure out whether there was even a shred of our marriage left to salvage. But when I tried to buy a plane ticket, I discovered something that sent me into a rage. The savings account I'd been contributing to for years, the one we'd planned to use for a house, a car, a future, was empty. Every penny had been withdrawn a month earlier. I turned to my credit card as a backup plan, only to find it maxed out. Lily had drained me dry. I managed to get access to a phone and called home, furious and desperate for answers. I called every 2 hours for an entire day, but no one picked up. The next day, I tried again. Still nothing. Frustrated, I sat down and wrote her a letter. I didn't bother with pleasantries. I asked her where the money had gone, why she hadn't answered my calls, and what the hell was going on with Tyler, Greg, Mark, and Rick. I never got a reply. With no way to get home, I canceled my leave and threw myself into my work. I volunteered for every dangerous mission, every high-risk assignment that came my way. If I couldn't escape the chaos of my personal life, I figured I might as well embrace the chaos of war. By the end of my tour, I'd earned several medals and a promotion. My fellow soldiers respected me, and for the first time in months, I felt like I had a purpose again. But the thought of going home filled me with dread. When I finally returned to the U.S., I walked into my house expecting nothing but silence. Instead, I found Lily waiting for me. She was visibly pregnant. My stomach dropped as I stared at her swollen belly. I'd been gone for a year. There was no way the baby was mine. Before I could say anything, she burst into tears. "Jack, I don't know who the father is," she sobbed. "But we can fix this. We can start over." I didn't say a word. I just stared at her, my mind racing. She didn't know who the father was because she'd been sleeping with more than one man. She wasn't even trying to deny it anymore. But the worst part? She wasn't just pregnant. She was also sick. She, along with pelvic inflammatory disease. Whatever sympathy I might have had for her was drowned out by the disgust and anger boiling inside me. Standing in the doorway of my own home, staring at Lily's pregnant belly and listening to her plead for another chance, I felt something inside me snap. For months, I'd carried the weight of her betrayal, trying to convince myself that we could fix what she'd broken. But this was the final blow. "You don't know who the father is," I repeated, my voice cold and flat. "And you think we can fix this?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Please, Jack. I made mistakes, but I love you. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." I stared at her, the woman I'd once loved so deeply, and felt nothing but contempt. "Some things can't be fixed," I said, stepping past her into the house. The next few days were a blur of arguments, accusations, and excuses. Lily tried everything to convince me to stay. Apologies, tears, even seduction. She claimed the baby didn't matter, that it wouldn't change the fact that we were married and she wanted to be with me. But every time she opened her mouth, all I could think about were the other men, the lies, and the life she'd built behind my back while I was risking mine overseas. I wasted no time filing for divorce. I didn't care what it would cost me. I just wanted out. I met with a lawyer the very next day, laying everything out on the table. The infidelity, the pregnancy, and the financial betrayal. The lawyer listened patiently, then gave me the bad news. Because we lived in a no-fault divorce state, none of it mattered. Adultery wouldn't affect the division of assets, and even though the baby wasn't mine, I could still be held financially responsible. In this state, he explained, if you're married at the time of the child's birth, the law assumes you're the father unless you can prove otherwise. And even if you prove otherwise, the court may still assign you child support if it's in the best interest of the child. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Not only had Lily destroyed our marriage, But now I was on the hook for a child that wasn't even mine. The divorce process was brutal. Lily played the victim at every turn, claiming that I'd abandoned her emotionally and driven her into the arms of other men. She even tried to blame my military schedule, saying that if I hadn't been gone so much, none of this would have happened. I didn't bother arguing. I knew the truth, and so did she. Eventually, the court ruled in her favor. I wasn't required to pay alimony, but I was ordered to pay child support, even after a DNA test proved I wasn't the biological father. The judge's reasoning? The child deserved financial stability, and I was the one with a steady income. On top of that, I was left with the debt Lily had racked up during our marriage. The empty savings account, the maxed-out credit card, and even her college loans. All of it became my responsibility because I'd co-signed everything. By the time the divorce was finalized, I was financially drained, emotionally exhausted, and utterly defeated. Lily, on the other hand, seemed to land on her feet. She moved in with one of her affair partners, Rick Carter, the same guy whose name had come up in the rumors I'd heard overseas. Within months, she'd given birth to her child, and Rick was playing the role of doting father. I, meanwhile, volunteered for another deployment. I didn't have anything tying me down anymore, and the combat zone felt like a better option than staying stateside and dealing with the mess Lily had left behind. At least overseas, I could earn hazard pay and avoid the constant reminders of my failure. The next few years were a grind. I threw myself into my work, earning promotions and respect from my fellow soldiers. But no matter how much I accomplished, I couldn't escape the bitterness that had taken root inside me. I'd given everything to my marriage, my time, my money, my trust, and Lily had thrown it all away. Every month, I wrote a check for child support, knowing that the money was going to a child who wasn't mine and a woman who'd betrayed me. It was a constant reminder of everything I'd lost, and it fueled a rage that I didn't know how to let go of. But over time, the rage began to fade. The army became my refuge, giving me purpose and stability in a life that felt otherwise meaningless. I focused on my career, earning a bachelor's degree and eventually a master's, proving to myself that I could rise above the wreckage of my past. Lily became a distant memory, a ghost from a life I no longer recognized. I heard through the grapevine that she'd married Rick and that they were raising her child together. Good for them, I thought bitterly. They deserved each other. I was free, but it didn't feel like freedom. Not yet. 16 years passed, and I'd long since stopped thinking about Lily or the disaster she left in my life. The army had become my saving grace, giving me structure and purpose when everything else had fallen apart. I climbed the ranks, earned degrees, and built a life for myself that no longer revolved around her betrayal. Still, every month, I wrote that check for child support, a constant, bitter reminder of a child that wasn't mine and a marriage that had cost me everything. I never expected to hear from Lily or her daughter again. I figured they'd moved on, just as I had. Then one day, out of the blue, I received a letter in the mail. The return address wasn't Lily's, it was her daughter's. For a moment, I just stared at the envelope, unsure if I even wanted to open it. I hadn't seen or spoken to her in over a decade. What could she possibly have to say to me now? When I finally tore it open, the first thing I noticed was how polite and formal the handwriting was, so different from the messy, emotional letters Lily used to write. The letter itself was short and to the point. Asterisk, Dear Jack, I hope this letter finds you well. My name is Samantha. I know we haven't spoken in years, but I wanted to thank you for everything you did for me growing up. I know you weren't my biological father, but you supported me when you didn't have to, and for that, I'm grateful. I'm writing to ask for your permission to change my last name and be adopted by my stepfather, Rick Carter. He has been a constant presence in my life, and I'd like to make it official. I hope you understand. Sincerely, Samantha, asterisk. I read the letter twice, then a third time. I wasn't sure what I was feeling, relief, anger, or maybe some twisted sense of closure. Samantha's words were polite, almost detached, but there was a clear undertone of finality. She wasn't asking for a relationship or an apology, just permission to sever the last legal tie between us. For a long time, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the letter. Memories of Lily flooded back, her tearful apologies, her promises to change, the lies she told so effortlessly. Samantha wasn't to blame for any of that, but she was a living reminder of everything I'd lost. In the end, my decision was easy. I wrote back the next day, Dear Samantha, I'm glad you found a family where you feel you belong. I respect your decision and hope you have a happy, fulfilling life. Consider this my official permission to move forward with the adoption. Take care. Jack, It wasn't a warm letter, but it was honest. I mailed it the same day, and with that, the final tie to Lily and her daughter was severed. The adoption brought an end to the child support payments I'd been making for 16 years. When I saw the balance in my bank account at the end of the first month without that deduction, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, freedom. I later learned through mutual acquaintances that Samantha had taken Rick's last name and that he'd walked her down the aisle when she got married. I wasn't invited to the wedding, and I didn't expect to be. The strangest thing about betrayal is how it lingers long after the initial wound. It starts as anger, a fire that burns so hot it consumes everything else. But over time, the flames die down, and what's left is something colder, bitterness. For years, that bitterness shaped the way I viewed my past. I told myself I was a victim, that my life had been derailed by Lily's lies and Tyler's arrogance. But somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling like a victim. The Army gave me structure, focus, and a purpose outside the mess Lily left behind. The further I climbed in my career, the more I realized that the betrayal I endured wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new one. Looking back now, I can see how much I've grown. That young, naive soldier who thought love and loyalty were guaranteed is long gone. In his place is someone who understands the value of trust, not just in others, but in himself. I let Lily's actions define my life for too long, allowing her betrayal to dictate my decisions and emotions. It wasn't until I let go of the resentment that I began to feel truly free. When Samantha wrote me that letter, asking for my permission to take Rick Carter's name, it felt like the final chapter closing on that part of my life. At first, I hesitated, not because I wanted to deny her, but because I wasn't sure how to feel about it. I'd spent years resenting the responsibility forced on me, but I'd never really thought about what Samantha's life must have been like. She grew up with a stepfather who loved her and a biological mother who made questionable choices. My role in her life had been purely financial, yet she still took the time to thank me for it. That letter made me realize something important. I'd been holding on to anger toward a child who had never asked to be caught in the middle of her mother's mess. Samantha wasn't to blame for what happened between Lily and me. Her polite, detached tone wasn't rejection. It was her way of giving me the closure I didn't even know I needed. Granting her request to take Rick's name wasn't just about ending child support payments. It was about letting go of the last thread tying me to that chapter of my life. Samantha was free to embrace the family she'd chosen, and I was free to move on without the bitterness that had haunted me for so long. Now, I see that the true revenge wasn't in ruining Lily, Tyler, or Rick. It was in building a life they could never touch. I found Claire, someone who loves me for who I am and values the loyalty and trust that Lily threw away. Claire taught me that love doesn't have to be painful or conditional, and for that, I'll always be grateful. The life I've built with Claire feels like a reward for all the pain I endured. We share a bond rooted in honesty and mutual respect, something I never realized I was missing before. With her, I don't have to question where I stand. I don't have to wonder if I'm enough. If I've learned anything from my journey, it's that betrayal doesn't have to define you. Pain can be a powerful teacher if you're willing to listen. For me, the lesson was about letting go. Not just of the people who hurt me, but of the bitterness that came with it. I've stopped thinking about Lily, Tyler, and Rick as villains in my story. They're just people who made selfish choices, and I was collateral damage. But I survived, and in surviving, I learned how to thrive. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to Cheating Storytelling for more gripping real-life tales. Catch you in the next video.